Hello everyone, and welcome to the next edition of the Holland Land Office Museum's Artifact Video Series. My name is Ryan Duffy, and I'm the director of the museum. And this week we're going to focus on something a little different from our usual videos in the series, and we're going to talk about some important visitors to Batavia and Genesee County, and that is either future, current, or previous presidents of the United States. Now, in researching this, we came across 16 of the presidents that officially came to Batavia and Genesee County, though we're sure there's a number of others who probably came through, but we can't find any information to confirm that or any real stories behind it. So we're going to talk about those 16 men that came through our area. Now, many of them didn't come when they were president. Most were before they were president, some after, but some came on their campaign trips or while they were in office. So we're going to go through the history, and we're going to do it chronologically from when they were president. So we're going to start with the earliest presidents and go forward in history, which doesn't mean they were the first ones to come through the area, just means they were the earliest president, or they're the earliest presidents in order to come to our area. So the first president we're going to talk about is John Quincy Adams, who was the sixth president of the United States. He actually came to Batavia in 1843, so after he was president, toward the end of his death. He was actually on a trip eventually to Buffalo, stopping in Rochester first, and he stopped in Batavia because he wanted to meet an old friend and former friend in Congress, Phineas Tracy, who was a lawyer here in Batavia, so he stopped in Batavia to see his friend on a short little trip. The next president we're going to talk about is Martin Van Buren, the eighth president of the United States, and he actually made two stops here in Batavia and Genesee County. The first was in 1829 when he was governor, and he was actually passing through on his way to Buffalo. And then again in 1839, while actually in office, he was taking the New York Central Railroad, the early version of it, and was actually coming back from a trip to Niagara Falls on his way back to Washington, D.C., and stopped in Genesee County to look at the state arsenal here, as well as to just check out the area, and was given a ball at one of the hotels. So there was a big fanfare around. Next, we have John Tyler, the 10th president of the United States, and he actually came to Batavia on June 17th, 1843, so actually the same year as John Quincy Adams. And he stepped in as he was on his way to Buffalo from Washington, D.C., and he was actually traveling with a couple of cabinet members. And Batavia rolled out the red carpet for him with several events. But he also was concerned with records at the Holland Land Company here, as there had been some issues downstate with in various counties which were dealing with Dutch records going all the way back. And he was interested to see what could be gleaned here in Batavia from the records of the Dutch Holland Land Company, though they were not related in any way. But he stopped by as a sitting president to be visiting in Batavia. Next up, we have a local boy who made it all the way to the presidency, and that is Millard Fillmore, who was born in the Finger Lakes region, but eventually made his home in Buffalo. And his time in Batavia, we know that he actually stopped here on his way in to see his uncle when he was traveling to Buffalo. He made several stops in Batavia, so it wasn't as president or even as a politician, but early in his life, he made the trek from the Finger Lakes to Buffalo, and Batavia was one of those stops along the way. Next up is a big one. It is Abraham Lincoln, 16th President of the United States. And he, or at least his body, came through Batavia and Genesee County twice. The first was on his inaugural trip from his home in Springfield, Illinois, all the way to Washington, D.C. In 1861. On the way to inauguration, he actually made a stop here in Batavia. And there's even a story that he may have stayed in Alexander for a time, though there's no way to really confirm that, but definitely came through on his way between Buffalo and Rochester. And then the second time was his funeral train after he was assassinated in April 1865. after the train left Washington, D.C. and started making its way across the country back to Springfield, Illinois. One of those stops was actually here in Batavia on April 27th, 1865, riding along the New York Central Railroad, which at the time the president was one of his good friends, Dean Richmond. And actually, Dean Richmond's personal locomotive took the president's funeral carriage between Rochester and Buffalo. But stopped for a few minutes early morning on August 27th, and thousands of people actually turned out at the depot to see the president's body and the funeral train that was carrying it. So the next one's actually a twofer, as we had two presidents, or future presidents, come through Batavia at the same time. This was actually during the election of 1880, when then candidate James Garfield stopped through Batavia on a quick whistle-stop tour. He would eventually win the election that year, but he also had another future president on board the train with him, and that was Benjamin Harrison, who was the 23rd, as Garfield would be the 20th. He was also on the train and gave a little speech in support of Garfield and the Republican nominees in the 1880 election. Next up, we have another president with a local connection, and that is Grover Cleveland, who is the 22nd and the 24th president, as he was elected twice, but not in a row. Cleveland actually was a lawyer and then sheriff in Buffalo. Now, Cleveland actually argued a case here in Batavia in 1882, so he was actually at the county courthouse here in Batavia. Next, we have Theodore Roosevelt, who was the 26th president of the United States, and he actually stopped through Batavia a couple different times. The first time was in 1896 on the campaign trail for William McKinley, as Theodore Roosevelt was his vice president nominee. And he stopped through Batavia to greet the crowds and espouse the Republican Party and the virtues of William McKinley to garner votes. And then the second time he came after his change to the Bull Moose Party and his progressive politics to help support that and to spread that message throughout the rest of the country, and Batavia being one of those stops where he gave his bull moose kind of speech in order to help that movement move along. Next, we have William Howard Taft, the 27th president of the United States, who stopped through in Batavia on a campaign tour in 1908 and stopped at the New York Central Station and spoke to people from the back of his train, but also spoke at a little conference here in Batavia while he was on the campaign trail. Next, we have Calvin Coolidge, who was the 30th president of the United States, who had maybe the oddest stop in Batavia, and maybe the shortest, as he was buzzing through Batavia in an automobile and just happened to stop briefly on Main Street and was actually greeted by a few individuals and shook hands. Apparently, he was supposed to meet with the Chamber of Commerce at the time, but actually never even showed up to their meeting and just sped on through Batavia on his way, I believe, to Rochester. So a very quick moment where the President Calvin Coolidge stopped here in Batavia. Next, we have Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who stopped here in Batavia actually 3 separate times. The first time was shortly after World War I, when he was then Assistant Secretary of the Navy, to talk about the importance that the Navy played during World War I and the importance of America's place in the world after the war. That was around 1920 to a couple hundred people at Ellicott Hall. He then stopped by when he was governor, late 1920s, where he spoke at a 4-H event here in Genesee County. And then in 1940, he came through again on a campaign stop and spoke from the back of his campaign train here in Batavia to hundreds of onlookers who were very excited to see the president coming through our area. Up next, we have Harry Truman, the 33rd president, who actually came through and stopped at Batavia 3 separate times. The first was in 1939 when he was then a senator from Missouri, stopped by to help promote the Democratic ticket for the upcoming election, as he wasn't tabbed to be the vice president yet. That came later, and spoke to a pretty good crowd, again, stopping through by train. But the next two times were a little bit more important. The next time was in 1948, when he was running for re-election for the presidency of the United States after he took over after Franklin Delano Roosevelt's death, and talked to a large crowd that they even had to bring out extra police in order to keep the crowd in order, as there was just so many people surrounding the depot. And he actually spoke longer than he intended to. It was supposed to be about a 10-minute speech, turned into about a 20-minute speech, as there was just so many people and so much excitement around it, so that Harry Truman was quite popular at the time. However, he came again 4 years later, a little different tone, as he was trying to support Adlai Stevenson, who was the Democratic nominee for president, and spoke out against a lot of his detractors that came about, and recalled his fondness for when he stopped in 1948. The successor to Truman, Dwight D. Eisenhower, so the 34th President of the United States, also made a campaign stop here in 1952 on his way to winning the election. And he actually talked about the negatives of Truman's administration and how things weren't going so well, and it was only he who could bring us out of it. And that Truman was running a very negative campaign himself, and he felt that Eisenhower, that is, felt that it was his job to raise up the confidence of the American people and to create a stronger nation that had gone downhill under Truman's administration and the negativity of the Korean War. So next we have Gerald Ford, who was the 38th President of the United States. He came through when he was a senator from Michigan and was actually the minority leader in the Senate, and he made a stop here in Batavia. It was a short stop for a dinner with the County Republican Committee as a way to promote the party here and talk about what good could come in the upcoming elections, one that Richard Nixon would eventually win, actually. And the most recent we have is George H.W. Bush, who was the 41st president. And he actually stopped in 1981 and spoke at Genesee Community College for a Boy Scout meeting. He was convinced to come by then Congressman Barbara Conable of our own area. And it was in order to promote the Boy Scouts, but also the concept of volunteering amongst young people and to create that spirit that would hopefully help the community going forward. So it was a very big affair and filled up the auditoriums at GCC. Well, I hope you enjoyed this edition of our Artifact video series, enjoyed our trip through history with the presidential visits to Batavia and Genesee County. Quite a lot of them, actually, more than maybe expected. And it was really interesting looking through the history of and sort of following the importance of Batavia, because when a president stops here or a major politician, that usually means there's some importance and value lended to the community. So we hope you enjoyed this video, and make sure to check out our series on our YouTube channel, Holland Land Office Museum, as we've now topped the century mark, over 100 videos in the series, so we're very proud of that. Be sure to go and check out any of our past ones, any ones you might have missed, and give us a like if you really enjoy them, and even subscribe to the channel, as it helps us out and also gets you notified quicker when we release new things. And also on the channel you can see all sorts of other content that we've either recorded or created over the time. But as always, the best way to come and learn more about what's in the video is to stop by and see us in person at the museum. We'll be happy to tell you more information and stories than what's just listed in these short videos. So we thank you, and we see you next week.